The issue of animal rights has been a subject of philosophical debate, legal discussion, and ethical consideration for centuries. At its core, the debate over animal rights revolves around whether non-human animals should be afforded moral consideration and legal protections similar to those granted to humans. Advocates of animal rights argue that animals, like humans, are sentient beings capable of experiencing pain, suffering, and pleasure, and therefore deserve to be treated with respect and dignity. Opponents, on the other hand, often argue that animals lack certain capacities, such as rationality or moral agency, that would entitle them to the same kinds of rights as humans. Nevertheless, the question of how we treat animals, whether in agriculture, research, entertainment, or companionship, raises profound ethical concerns about our relationship with other living beings and the moral obligations we owe to them. One of the central arguments for animal rights is based on the principle of sentience, which refers to the capacity to experience sensations such as pain and pleasure. This principle, championed by philosophers like Peter Singer, argues that the ability to suffer or experience well-being is the only relevant criterion for moral consideration. According to this view, if an animal can suffer, it has an interest in avoiding suffering, and we have a moral duty to take that interest into account. Singer's approach, often termed animal liberation, is rooted in utilitarian ethics, which holds that actions are morally right if they promote the greatest happiness for the greatest number. Under this framework, the suffering of animals matters just as much as the suffering of humans, and practices that cause unnecessary harm to animals, such as factory farming or animal testing, are morally unjustifiable. This view challenges traditional anthropocentric perspectives that place human interests above those of animals. Historically, many ethical systems, influenced by religious, cultural, or philosophical beliefs, have considered humans to be inherently superior to animals, often citing human rationality, language, or the capacity for moral reasoning as the basis for this superiority. For example, in the Western philosophical tradition, thinkers like Aristotle and Immanuel Kant argued that animals exist for human use and that humans, by virtue of their rational capacities, are entitled to use animals as resources. These views have shaped societal attitudes toward animals, justifying practices such as hunting, farming, and experimentation on the grounds that animals exist primarily to serve human purposes. However, contemporary animal rights advocates reject this hierarchical view, arguing instead for a more egalitarian approach to the treatment of animals. Philosophers like Tom Regan have advanced the idea that animals possess intrinsic value, that is, their value does not depend on their usefulness to humans. One of the most compelling arguments in favor of animal rights is the argument from marginal cases. This argument challenges the notion that humans are entitled to special moral consideration based on their capacities for reason, self-awareness, or moral agency. It points out that many humans, such as infants, people with severe cognitive disabilities, or individuals in comas, lack these capacities, yet we still consider them deserving of moral respect and protection. If we extend moral consideration to these marginal cases of human beings, the argument goes, we should also extend moral consideration to animals that possess similar capacities for experience and suffering. The argument from marginal cases thus undermines the idea that species membership alone is sufficient to justify the differential treatment of humans and animals. Another important consideration in the animal rights debate is the concept of speciesism, a term coined by psychologist Richard Ryder and popularized by Peter Singer. Speciesism refers to the unjustified bias in favor of one's own species over others, analogous to racism or sexism. Just as it is morally wrong to discriminate against individuals based on their race or gender, speciesism argues that it is wrong to discriminate against beings based solely on their species. Speciesism, according to this view, is an arbitrary and morally indefensible form of prejudice, and overcoming it requires us to extend moral consideration to all sentient beings, regardless of species. This perspective calls for a radical rethinking of the ways in which animals are treated in human societies, particularly in industries such as factory farming, where animals are often subjected to extreme suffering for the sake of human consumption. The issue of animal agriculture, in particular, has become a flashpoint in the debate over animal rights. Factory farming, the dominant method of animal production in many parts of the world, involves the mass confinement and exploitation of animals for meat, dairy, and eggs. Animals in factory farms are often kept in cramped, unsanitary conditions, denied the ability to engage in natural behaviors, and subjected to painful procedures such as debeaking, tail docking, and castration without anesthesia. Proponents of animal rights argue that these practices are morally indefensible, as they cause immense suffering to animals for the sake of human convenience and profit. They advocate for a shift toward plant-based diets and the development of alternative food systems that do not rely on the exploitation of animals. In addition to the ethical concerns surrounding animal agriculture, The use of animals in scientific research and testing is another area of significant moral controversy. For decades, animals have been used in laboratories to test the safety of drugs, cosmetics, and other products, as well as to study diseases and medical treatments. While some argue that animal experimentation. The entertainment industry is another domain in which animals are often exploited for human amusement, further raising ethical questions about our treatment of non-human beings. Circuses, zoos, aquariums, and various forms of wildlife tourism often involve the confinement and training of animals in unnatural environments. Animal rights advocates argue that these practices violate the dignity and autonomy of animals, reducing them to mere objects of entertainment. They call for an end to the use of animals in entertainment and for the promotion of ethical alternatives, such as wildlife sanctuaries and documentaries, that allow people to appreciate and learn about animals without causing them harm. Legal frameworks around the world have begun to reflect some of the growing concern for animal welfare, though the extent to which animals are protected by law varies significantly by country. In some places, animals are still regarded as property under the law, with few protections against exploitation and abuse. However, there has been a gradual shift toward recognizing animals as sentient beings deserving of legal consideration. For example, in recent years, several countries, including Austria, Switzerland, and New Zealand, have enacted laws that recognize animals as sentient beings and provide them with certain legal rights. In the United States, federal laws such as the Animal Welfare Act and the Endangered Species Act offer some protection to animals, though critics argue that these laws are often inadequate and poorly enforced. The movement for animal rights continues to gain momentum as people become more aware of the ethical, environmental, and health implications of their treatment of animals. Advances in technology and increasing public awareness of the conditions in factory farms, laboratories, and entertainment industries have led many to question the moral justifications for using animals in these ways. The rise of plant-based diets, animal-free alternatives to consumer products, and ethical tourism options reflects a growing recognition that our treatment of animals is a moral issue that demands serious consideration. The debate over animal rights raises fundamental questions about the moral status of non-human animals and our ethical obligations toward them. Philosophers, activists, and legal scholars have made compelling arguments that animals, as sentient beings capable of suffering, deserve moral consideration and protection from exploitation and harm. The challenge of overcoming speciesism and extending rights to animals requires a rethinking of many entrenched social practices, from factory farming and animal testing to the use of animals in entertainment. While there are still significant obstacles to achieving full recognition of animal rights, the growing movement toward more compassionate and ethical treatment of animals signals an important shift in how we view our relationship with the other beings that share our planet. The growing movement for animal rights reflects not only ethical concerns but also pressing environmental and health issues. The treatment of animals, especially in industrial agriculture, has significant implications for environmental sustainability, public health, and global food security. The interconnectedness of these issues underscores the need to reconsider our relationship with animals, not just from a moral standpoint but also from a practical and ecological perspective. One of the most urgent environmental concerns related to animal agriculture is its contribution to climate change. Factory farming, which dominates meat and dairy production worldwide, is a major source of greenhouse gas emissions, including methane, nitrous oxide, and carbon dioxide. According to the United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization, FAO, animal agriculture is responsible for approximately 14.5% of global greenhouse gas emissions, more than the entire transportation sector. This is primarily due to the methane produced by livestock, particularly cattle, as well as the deforestation and land use changes driven by the demand for grazing land and animal feed. Deforestation, in turn, exacerbates climate change by reducing the planet's capacity to absorb carbon dioxide. Industrial farms often produce vast amounts of waste, which can contaminate rivers, lakes, and groundwater with harmful substances such as nitrates, phosphorus, and antibiotics. The heavy use of land for animal feed crops, such as soy and corn, also leads to soil erosion, pesticide runoff, and the destruction of natural habitats. The cumulative environmental impact of these practices has led many environmentalists to call for a shift away from animal-based agriculture toward more sustainable food systems, such as plant-based diets and regenerative farming practices. From a public health perspective, the industrial farming of animals poses several significant risks. One of the most alarming is the rise of antibiotic resistance. In factory farms, animals are often given large amounts of antibiotics to promote growth and prevent disease in crowded, unsanitary conditions. The overuse of antibiotics in agriculture contributes to the development of antibiotic-resistant bacteria, which can spread to humans through the consumption of meat, contact with animals, or environmental contamination. The World Health Organization, WHO, has identified antibiotic resistance as one of the greatest threats to global health, and reducing antibiotic use in agriculture is considered a critical step in addressing this crisis. Moreover, the conditions in which animals are raised in factory farms increase the risk of zoonotic diseases, diseases that can be transmitted from animals to humans. The COVID-19 pandemic, which is believed to have originated from a wildlife market, has drawn attention to the dangers of close interactions between humans and animals in unregulated or industrial settings. Similarly, factory farms, where large numbers of animals are kept in close quarters, provide ideal conditions for the emergence and spread of infectious diseases such as avian flu, swine flu, and other viruses that can cross the species barrier. Public health experts have warned that the continued expansion of industrial animal farming increases the likelihood of future pandemics, highlighting the need for more ethical and sustainable food systems. In addition to the environmental and public health consequences, the ethical treatment of animals in agriculture has implications for global food security. As the global population continues to grow, there is increasing demand for food, particularly in developing countries where meat consumption is rising. However, animal-based agriculture is an inefficient way to produce food. It requires vast amounts of land, water, and grain to produce relatively small amounts of meat, dairy, and eggs. For example, it is estimated that producing 1 kilogram of beef requires. Building on the ethical, environmental, and health considerations explored in the previous sections, the movement for animal rights also challenges us to rethink fundamental concepts about justice, moral responsibility, and the boundaries of legal rights. As society increasingly grapples with the issue of how we treat animals, the extension of legal rights to non-human animals has emerged as a central topic within both the animal rights movement and broader legal and philosophical discourse. This progression from moral consideration to legal recognition represents an important step in the ongoing evolution of human-animal relations. The legal status of animals has long been a point of contention. For centuries, animals have been classified as property under the law, with their value determined primarily by their utility to humans. This classification has had significant implications for how animals are treated in legal systems worldwide, as it frames animals as objects rather than beings with intrinsic rights. As property, animals have traditionally been afforded few protections beyond those that serve human interests. For example, animal cruelty laws often prohibit the infliction of gratuitous harm on animals, but these laws typically focus on preventing harm that could affect human sensibilities or social order rather than recognizing the inherent rights of animals to live free from suffering. However, the animal rights movement seeks to shift this legal paradigm by advocating for the recognition of animals as legal subjects rather than mere objects of property. Legal scholars and activists argue that animals, as sentient beings with the capacity to experience pain and pleasure, should be granted basic legal protections that reflect their moral status. This includes the right to live free from unnecessary harm, exploitation, and abuse, as well as the right to engage in natural behaviors and live in environments that support their well-being. By recognizing animals as legal subjects, society would acknowledge that animals have interests of their own, interests that deserve legal protection, just as the rights of humans are protected under the law. One of the most prominent efforts to secure legal rights for animals is the work of organizations like the Non-Human Rights Project, NHRP, which seeks to achieve legal personhood for certain animals, such as great apes, elephants, and dolphins. Legal personhood is a status traditionally reserved for human beings, but it has also been extended to corporations, rivers, and other entities that have been granted legal standing to protect their interests. The Non-Human Rights Project argues that certain animals, particularly those with advanced cognitive abilities and social complexity, should be granted legal personhood because they possess qualities such as self-awareness, autonomy, and the capacity for emotional bonds, qualities that merit moral and legal consideration. The argument for legal personhood for animals challenges the anthropocentric view that only human beings can hold rights. Advocates argue that the criteria for legal personhood should not be based solely on species membership but on an individual's capacities and interests. For animals such as chimpanzees, who share over 98% of their DNA with humans and exhibit behaviors such as tool use, problem-solving, and empathy, the case for legal personhood is particularly strong. By recognizing the profound cognitive and emotional capacities of these animals, proponents of personhood argue that it is unjust to continue treating them as property or denying them basic legal protections. One of the key legal cases highlighting this issue is the Happy the Elephant case in New York. The Non-Human Rights Project filed a writ of habeas corpus, a legal petition traditionally used to challenge unlawful detention, on behalf of an elephant named Happy, who had been kept in captivity at the Bronx Zoo for decades. The NHRP argued that Happy's confinement violated her right to bodily liberty, as she is a cognitively complex being capable of suffering from her restricted environment. While the court ultimately ruled against granting Happy legal personhood, the case sparked widespread public debate about the ethical and legal status of animals, and it marked a significant step in the ongoing struggle to secure legal recognition for non-human animals. Despite setbacks, efforts to extend legal rights to animals continue to gain traction as more people recognize the moral and scientific basis for treating animals with greater respect and dignity. The growing body of research on animal cognition, intelligence, and emotional complexity has played a crucial role in challenging outdated assumptions about the capacities of animals. Studies have shown that many animals, including primates, dolphins, and birds, possess sophisticated problem-solving abilities, social structures, and even cultural traditions that were once thought to be uniquely human. This expanding understanding of animal behavior provides further support for the view that animals deserve moral and legal consideration. Moreover, developments in animal law reflect the increasing recognition of animals' interests within legal frameworks. Animal law is an emerging field that encompasses a range of legal issues related to the treatment of animals, from anti-cruelty statutes to wildlife conservation laws. In recent years, several law schools around the world have established animal law programs, and courts have begun to hear cases that challenge the conventional treatment of animals as property. For example, in some jurisdictions, courts have ruled that companion animals, such as dogs and cats, should be treated more like family members than property in cases of custody disputes or negligence claims. These rulings signal a gradual shift in how the legal system views the relationship between humans and animals. At the international level, several countries have taken steps to improve legal protections for animals by recognizing their status as sentient beings. For instance, Switzerland and Austria have passed laws that explicitly acknowledge animals as sentient, meaning they can experience pain and suffering, and have implemented stricter animal welfare regulations as a result. In New Zealand, legislation has been passed that recognizes non-human animals as sentient beings and prohibits certain forms of exploitation, such as the use of animals in cosmetic testing. These legal developments represent important milestones in the global movement to secure rights for animals and reflect a growing consensus that animals should not be treated as mere resources for human use. However, the extension of legal rights to animals raises complex ethical and philosophical questions. One of the central challenges is determining which animals should be granted legal rights and what kinds of rights they should have. Some advocates argue that all sentient beings, regardless of their species or cognitive abilities, deserve basic rights such as the right to life, the right to freedom from unnecessary suffering, and the right to live in environments that support their well-being. Others suggest that legal rights should be extended only to certain animals, such as primates, cetaceans, and highly social animals that exhibit higher levels of cognitive functioning, self-awareness, or emotional complexity. This debate touches on the broader question of how we define rights and what criteria we use to determine who is entitled to them. While some philosophers argue that rights should be based on rationality, self-awareness, or the capacity for moral agency, others contend that the capacity to suffer is the most relevant criterion for moral and legal consideration. According to this latter view, if an animal can experience pain and suffering, it has an interest in avoiding harm, and we have a moral obligation to protect that interest, regardless of the animal's cognitive or emotional capacities. Another philosophical challenge is balancing the rights of animals with the needs and interests of humans. For example, if legal rights are extended to animals, how should society address conflicts between human and animal interests, such as the use of animals in medical research or the preservation of endangered species in zoos? These questions require careful consideration of the ethical principles underlying our treatment of animals, as well as the practical implications of granting animals legal standing. In discussing the concept of animal rights, we are confronted with profound ethical questions about the treatment of sentient beings, our responsibilities towards non-human creatures, and the moral considerations that guide our interactions with the animal kingdom. Rooted in principles of compassion, empathy, and moral consideration for all living beings, the discourse on animal rights challenges us to re-evaluate our relationship with animals and strive towards a more ethical and compassionate existence. From a Stoic perspective, which emphasizes the interconnectedness of all living beings and the importance of compassion and justice in our interactions with others, the concept of animal rights resonates deeply. Stoic philosophy encourages individuals to cultivate virtues such as kindness, empathy, and benevolence towards all creatures, recognizing the inherent value and dignity of sentient beings, regardless of their species. By extending the principles of Stoicism to the realm of animal rights, we are reminded of our ethical duties to treat animals with respect, care, and consideration, acknowledging their capacity for suffering, joy, and companionship. Stoicism teaches us to cultivate a sense of kinship with all living beings, recognizing that we are part of a larger tapestry of life in which each creature plays a unique and valuable role. Moreover, the Stoic emphasis on living in harmony with nature and the natural order of the cosmos underscores the importance of respecting the inherent rights and welfare of animals as integral components of the interconnected web of life. By aligning our actions with principles of compassion, empathy, and justice towards animals, we can embody the virtues of Stoicism and contribute to a more ethical and compassionate world for all living beings. In essence, the discourse on animal rights challenges us to reflect on our moral responsibilities towards sentient beings, cultivate virtues of compassion and empathy, and strive towards a more ethical and harmonious relationship with the animal kingdom. Through the lens of Stoic philosophy, we are called to embrace a worldview that values the intrinsic worth and dignity of all living beings, recognizing our interconnectedness and shared responsibility to protect and care for the creatures with whom we share this planet. As we navigate the complexities of animal rights and ethical considerations, let us heed the wisdom of Stoic philosophy, cultivate virtues that embody compassion and justice towards all living beings, and strive towards a more compassionate and ethical existence in which the rights and welfare of animals are safeguarded and respected. Stay tuned for further reflections on animal rights and the intersection of ethics, compassion, and virtue through the lens of Stoicism, for it is through the cultivation of empathy and moral consideration that we can forge a more compassionate and harmonious world for all sentient beings. In continuing our exploration of animal rights through the lens of Stoic philosophy, we are called to reflect on the ethical considerations, moral responsibilities, and virtues that guide our interactions with the animal kingdom. The principles of compassion, empathy, and justice that underpin both Stoicism and the discourse on animal rights compel us to re-examine our treatment of sentient beings and strive towards a more ethical and compassionate relationship with all creatures. Stoicism teaches us to cultivate virtues such as kindness, compassion, and benevolence towards animals, recognizing their capacity for suffering, joy, and connection. By extending our circle of moral concern to include animals and acknowledging their inherent worth and dignity, we align our actions with the Stoic ideal of living in harmony with nature and the interconnected web of life. Furthermore, the Stoic emphasis on living in accordance with reason and virtue calls us to consider the ethical implications of our choices and behaviors towards animals. By approaching the discourse on animal rights with a mindset grounded in Stoic principles, we are encouraged to act with integrity, empathy, and moral clarity, fostering a sense of interconnectedness and shared responsibility towards all living beings. Stoicism invites us to view animals not merely as resources for human use, but as sentient beings deserving of respect, care, and ethical consideration. By embodying virtues of compassion, empathy, and justice in our interactions with animals, we contribute to a more compassionate and ethical world in which the rights and welfare of all creatures are upheld and safeguarded. In essence, the integration of Stoic philosophy with the discourse on animal rights compels us to re-evaluate our moral responsibilities, cultivate virtues that embody empathy and compassion towards animals, and strive towards a more ethical and harmonious relationship with the natural world. Through the practice of Stoicism, we can align our actions with principles of justice, integrity, and moral consideration, fostering a sense of interconnectedness and ethical responsibility towards all sentient beings. As we navigate the complexities of animal rights and ethical considerations, let us embrace the wisdom of Stoic philosophy, cultivate virtues that embody compassion and empathy towards animals, and work towards a more compassionate and ethical existence in which the rights and welfare of all living beings are valued and respected. Stay tuned for further reflections on animal rights and the intersection of ethics, compassion, and virtue through the lens of Stoicism, for it is through the cultivation of empathy and moral consideration that we can create a more ethical and harmonious world for all sentient beings. In the culmination of our exploration of animal rights within the framework of Stoic philosophy, we are reminded of the profound ethical considerations, moral responsibilities, and virtues that guide our interactions with the animal kingdom. The convergence of Stoic principles of compassion, empathy, and justice with the discourse on animal rights calls us to embody a deeper sense of ethical awareness, interconnectedness, and moral consideration towards all sentient beings. Stoicism teaches us to cultivate virtues that transcend species boundaries, recognizing the intrinsic worth and dignity of animals as fellow creatures sharing this interconnected web of life. By extending our moral concern to include animals and acknowledging their capacity for joy, suffering, and companionship, we foster a sense of kinship and shared responsibility towards the welfare and rights of all living beings. Moreover, the Stoic emphasis on living in harmony with nature and aligning our actions with reason and virtue compels us to reflect on the ethical implications of our treatment of animals. By approaching the discourse on animal rights through a Stoic lens, we are called to act with integrity, compassion, and moral clarity, fostering a more ethical and compassionate relationship with the natural world and its diverse inhabitants. Stoicism invites us to transcend anthropocentrism and view animals as sentient beings deserving of respect, care, and ethical consideration. By cultivating virtues of empathy, compassion, and justice in our interactions with animals, we contribute to a more humane and ethical world in which the rights and welfare of all creatures are safeguarded and respected. In essence, the integration of Stoic philosophy with the discourse on animal rights invites us to embody virtues that transcend species boundaries, foster a deeper sense of interconnectedness and moral consideration towards all sentient beings, and strive towards a more ethical and compassionate existence in which the rights and dignity of animals are upheld and protected. As we continue to navigate the complexities of animal rights and ethical considerations, let us embrace the wisdom of Stoic philosophy, cultivate virtues that embody compassion and empathy towards animals, and work towards a more ethical and harmonious relationship with the natural world and its diverse inhabitants. Through the practice of Stoicism, we can cultivate a deeper sense of ethical awareness, interconnectedness, and moral responsibility towards all living beings, fostering a world in which compassion, justice, and respect are extended to every sentient being, human and non-human alike.